All right, everyone, we start off today talking about Caitlyn Jenner's run for California governor. My thoughts on it and a little bit of analysis, especially of people's reaction, because a lot of people have already made up their mind to either support or not support based on the trans thing and aren't even looking at actually what Jenner believes in. Both the platforms, the actual, current platform, and some past behavior, actually, that probably would keep me, actually, from supporting the bid. Unless it's if it's Caitlyn Jenner versus Gavin Newsom. Newsom is wants to destroy the state's economy, be woke and shit. Jenner wouldn't do that, but at the same time you've got the Trump being thrown under the bus issue, which is slightly disturbing. First and foremost, there'll be a link in the description, by the way, to the little ditty about the run. But there will also be 4 links in a pinned comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. Links to other video hosting sites that I use. Again, keep in mind, I make 2 videos a day on those sites that I don't put on YouTube, just to incentivize people to make the switch. And it's working. YouTube's obviously no longer rewarding content creators unless you have a corporate sponsor or a D after your name. So keeping that in mind, greener pastures do exist, thankfully. By the way, Odyssey and Rumble both now having streaming, which I will be testing over the coming weeks. BitChute plans to do that soon as well, so now you have streaming alternatives that are pro-free speech. Anyway, first and foremost, back in 2018, Jenner threw Trump under the bus under the idea that he was being anti-LGBT. At the time, and I remember analyzing this, I said, well, that's whacked out. That doesn't make any sense at all. Trump has done literally nothing to attack people who are gay or transgendered or whatever. It never happened. That was a bunch of hype by the legacy media. It's like a lot of people still think that the Trump tax cuts didn't help the middle class. They're living in a fantasy world that's been carefully promulgated to them propaganda style, and the fact that Jenner would fall for that, despite being at least initially fairly receptive to Trump, actually being friendly towards him initially. You'll remember when Trump was in, I think it was still in the primaries, he was like, well, yeah, Caitlyn Jenner can come to Trump Tower, use whichever bathroom you want, I don't give a fuck, and actually that was a fun moment. Trump, keep in mind, being the first Republican candidate to actually acknowledge the virtue of gay rights on the stage in any real major capacity, but right at the convention. Say, a log cabin Republican had given a speech right before he was on, and he was like, well, I think it's great because, this person's actually being applauded. That wouldn't have happened a few years ago. Trump was a pro-LGBT president, and so for Jenner to throw him under the bus, let's face it, I think that Jenner was looking for an excuse to do that. Because Trump, by that point, he was so embattled by wave after wave of propaganda. If I'm thinking about the possibility of entering politics, I'm like, well, I'm an Olympian. If you're Jenner, I'm an Olympian. I'm sort of an unofficial symbol of the trans movement, although, again, when this first happened, I pointed out, shit, there are a million other people who are transgendered who came out that don't have your advantages. They don't have multi-million-dollar friends. They don't have Olympic medals and shit like that. They don't have a reality show. And so for you to somehow get major credit for being so stunning and brave to come out and do what other people have done for years before, it was a little bit much for me and rankled me. But at the same time, you wouldn't want to be associated necessarily with Trump if you're running in the state of California. They've got a jungle primary system. Newsom is facing a recall. Whether it works or not remains to be seen. That slot will, though, be open for a potential GOP contender, because otherwise in a jungle primary, if you're associated with Trump in California, probably you come in 3rd or 4th place. That means there'll just be 2 Democrats running against each other. It's a pragmatic move, but it's a shystery, a shifty one. However, I would say, on the flip side, if you actually look at the main platforms of the burgeoning candidacy, really it's about ending the lockdown and reverting some of the leftist policies of California economically. Herein, though, you run into another problem. California would still have a legislature that was Democrat-controlled. If you therefore have a Republican president, it has to be like an Arnold Schwarzenegger. It has to be a left-wing Republican, a rhino, essentially. It has to be someone who is ideologically out of lockstep with the mainline National Party. This is something that the Democrats have had a problem with, too. People who identify as liberal or leftist or Democrat keep pressuring like Joe Manchin or something, who's from fucking West Virginia, of all places, to change his ideology. At the state and local level, that's political suicide. The problem is that Jenner getting in there would be faced with a situation where, other than ending lockdowns for business purposes, which is largely an executive decision, there's nothing that would be able to be done. California is going to have a major economic reckoning. The paradigm shift needs to be stronger than it currently is and culminate in order for California to potentially have any meaningful reform of its far-left policies. Anti-gun policies, anti-small business policies, certainly hyper-regulation and high taxation on anyone who's remotely made it, unless they're in Hollywood Hills. Once they get to that level of stardom, all of a sudden the governor cares about them. But if they're in that sweet spot between the middle class and the upper middle class, like, something like 30-40% of the population, they're fucked. California is a weird state, and a person who's a Republican there is not going to be not going to act like Trump. Not going to be like Lindsey Graham or Dan Crenshaw or something. You're not going to get that kind of Republican there. You're going to get an Arnold Schwarzenegger-style Republican. By the way, again, this is basically the same concept, isn't it? Arnold Schwarzenegger at first was considered a joke candidacy. All he had to do was say, well, he's famous and rich, so he can self-fund mostly. He's got the name recognition, and all he had to do was have a platform that wasn't completely warped. With Jenner, the problem is that the trans issue as well becomes a wedge issue. I don't know that it's going to work out very well, but at the end of the day, people have to make their decision. Which one's more important? Ideological consistency, like as opposed to throwing Trump under the bus for a non-issue, believing legacy media propaganda. Is that more important, or is it getting rid of Newsom in order to initiate modest reform? And really, modest reform is all you're going to get. The only meaningful thing I think that would be done under Caitlyn Jenner's gubernatorial system would be lockdowns ending. And even that, not necessarily a sure thing. What if the legislature there, that could go far blue, decides to override? Use actual legislation to crack down on things. And then the buck stops there, and then Jenner gets blamed for it. And becomes a one-term, and gets recalled maybe too. It's a very, very strange political situation you've got when you're talking about this particular style of politicking. The analysis has to go deeper, but really what I see, and this bothers me a little bit, is people with their very, very smooth brain takes are just like, well, Caitlyn Jenner is transgendered, so I could never vote for them. Or, oh, Caitlyn Jenner's transgendered, stunning and brave, I have to vote for her because otherwise I'm a bigot. And that's like a significant minority, at least, of the posts that I see with regards to it. And then you have people who are like, well, but Caitlyn Jenner once was friendly with Trump, so that's a no from me, orange man bad, not even realizing necessarily half the time that Trump was thrown under the bus in 2018 over a non-existent LGBT issue. Talk about a goddamn free-for-all politically. That's about all. Peace out.